everyone, and welcome to Getting Started on Red Hat Infrastructure for Windows Administrators, provided by Red Hat and Stone Door Group. My name is Andrea Alexander with Stone Door Group, and I'll be your host for today's event. In today's workshop, we will demonstrate how to set up the proper Windows to Red Hat infrastructure using Satellite 6 and Red Hat Identity Manager, so users can access both systems and shared file storage using their Active Directory credentials. Our presenters are Eric Archer, Michael Chen, supported by Michael McDonough, all senior consultants at the Stone Door Group. For those of you not familiar with Stone Door Group, we are a Red Hat Apex partner specializing in DevOps transformation. We work with companies of all sizes to implement best practices using Red Hat solutions. As part of our service offerings, we have two items that may be of interest to those attending today's session. The first is our Satellite 6 Accelerator engagement. This service provides the end-to-end solution to bring your RHEL servers into a single console management platform, allowing you to manage your infrastructure with a single console. In our Accelerator engagement, we take care of installing and configuring Satellite 6, registering clients, and integrating with Active Directory. We do provide all the subscriptions needed as well as consulting services to ensure you successfully implement Satellite and have the necessary controls in place. Key areas improved through the implementation of Red Hat Satellite include content management, patching and software management, as well as provisioning and subscription management. What we found is that most of our customers have Red Hat servers in their infrastructure, but have limited strategy around unified management. This leads to support, security, and compliance risks. So this service has been a very successful engagement with our clients who are looking to mitigate the downside risk by streamlining management of their infrastructure. A typical engagement will usually take around 2 to 3 weeks from start to finish. The second item I wanted to bring to your attention is our complimentary 5-day access to today's lab environment. This is offered to those attendees who participate in the entire workshop and also schedule an initial consultation with us. To request your complimentary consultation and access to your 5-day lab, please email us at letsdothis@stonedoorgroup.com, and our team will get you scheduled for a follow-up. This information is also available on our website at stonedoorgroup.com, and we'll be sending out this deck following today's event, so you have access to these details as well. And you can find more about Stone Door Group and our offerings at stonedoorgroup.com. And thank you again for joining us today for today's event. Red Hat and Stone Door Group have teamed up to provide a series of workshops to enhance your knowledge and skills with Red Hat solutions. This is the first in our workshop series. Following today, we will host 3 additional workshops. June 9th, we have OpenShift on IBM. July 11th, Red Hat for Windows Administrators Part 2. And August 5th, Migrate Legacy Applications. We hope you will join us for these events in the coming months. Our team will send the series schedule and the registration information to all participants following today's event. I do have a few housekeeping items I'd like to take care of real quick. If you are experiencing audio issues, you may dial in using the toll-free number provided on the screen. That's 1-888-788-0099, and our webinar ID is 962-4835-0962. If you need assistance, please contact a member of the Stone Door Group technical support team at webinar@stonedoorgroup.com. Our team members are standing by ready to assist. For those interested, we are recording today's event. We'll be sending out links to all participants for access to the event recording and the presentation materials. Today's workshop format includes both a demonstration and a lab. The demonstration will last approximately 45 minutes to an hour, then we'll break out into groups for today's lab work. The first 25 attendees have been selected for a hands-on lab environment with remaining participants in our overflow demonstration lab. If everyone could please check the chat to see if you have an invitation for the hands-on lab, and please follow the link when instructed. During the lab, we ask that all participants submit questions through Zoom's chat feature, and you can find this panel on the bottom right corner of the Zoom screen. Our instructors will address your questions as soon as they are able. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Our featured instructor is Eric Archer with the Stone Door Group. Eric is a senior consultant and instructor at Stone Door Group, where he helps clients integrate with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, supported by Red Hat Satellite and Identity Manager. Our Overflow Lab demonstrator instructor is Michael Chen. Michael is a senior consultant at Stone Door Group, delivering clients with Red Hat Satellite 6, Ansible, and Identity Manager solutions. And then technical support today is by Mike McDonough. Mike is also a senior consultant with Stone Door Group, and he will be providing support via our chat feature. Thanks to our talented team of instructors for facilitating this workshop. Eric, I will go ahead and pass the session over to you.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I definitely appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our workshop today. So we are going to be looking at how we integrate Red Hat infrastructure with Windows resources. So we have a lot to cover today. It's going to be a good session. I'm going to do a bit of a demonstration, show you guys how this works, and then turn a bunch of you loose on labs so you guys will be able to do it on your own. Michael Chen will be taking over and doing a actual demonstration for anyone. We have lab environments for 25 people. We've given out that information to those 25. The rest of you will be walking through Mike, or walking through that with Mike as he kind of goes through it step by step. Give me 1 second. All right, so Mike's going to be handling that. So a little bit about this workshop is we want to demonstrate how we can configure Red Hat Enterprise Linux systems so that your Windows users can log into a fully managed RHEL server and then access some shared Windows storage. So we're going to be working with several Red Hat products today. Obviously, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we have 3 systems that we're going to be working with. We are going to be working with one of them that is a Satellite 6-7 server. We also have an IDM server, and we have a RHEL 8 client system. So those are what we're going to be working with. And we also do have Windows infrastructure that we're going to be interacting with. Those are already built. Those are kind of a shared resource. So you guys are going to be able to access that. All 25, 26 labs will be able to access those Windows resources. There are a few things that I've pre-configured just because we don't have time and all the access in order to do that. But I'll actually walk you guys through that. So I'm going to show you guys all of our resources, everything that we've got, and then you guys will be able to go out and work on that on your own. So there's basically 3 reasons why people are choosing this particular workshop or choosing this route. First of all, heterogeneous environments. It's getting much more common. I mean, it's been common for years, but it's getting more and more common where you have corporate environments where people have their Windows environments and then they have their Linux environments. And a lot of times those were really segregated. You know, getting those to work together was not always the easiest thing. So we're going to be looking at how we do integrate that. Another issue why people are interested in this is consistent account management. When we had those heterogeneous environments, it was really, really common for organizations to have a whole bunch of Windows users that were managed by their Active Directory environment, their Active Directory servers, and then you'd have a bunch of Linux servers, and often each Linux server would have its own set of user accounts. Then we had NIS and LDAP, and so we would have, centralized account management for Linux, depending on, the sophistication of your environment. But what we're looking at here is actually setting it up so that we have our Active Directory users, and we can actually use those to log into our Linux environments. So instead of having to manage users in multiple different places, multiple different administrators, inconsistencies, you might have, the same user account on your Windows boxes and some of your Linux boxes, but they might have different passwords, different schedules of when you've got to change your passwords and things like that. So it was, kind of a management nightmare keeping everybody's accounts in line and consistent. By setting up what we're going to be doing today, we can actually use our Active Directory accounts to log into our Linux boxes. Active Directory management will handle all that. So you don't have to have a bunch of different account teams and a bunch of different accounts and all that kind of stuff. Just simplifies things a lot. The other issue that we get is shared resources. We may have resources that we want on the Windows side or the Linux side that we want to have access one way or the other, one direction or the other. And so we're going to look at one of the ways that we can set it up so that we can have access. We're actually going to be working obviously on our Linux client, and we're going to actually be sending some files out to our Active Directory, or actually our shared Windows resource. So some of the assumptions is that you guys are running some Windows servers using Active Directory for account management in addition to some RHEL servers. We typically have, the technical challenges that I just talked about: duplication of effort, managing our accounts, multiple user logins, multiple passwords, restricted access to different resources. Now, obviously, you want to align your corporate environment with the concept of least privilege. You want to give people the appropriate resources to do their job, but you don't want to give them, unlimited access to the kingdom. That's how things get deleted, broken, corrupted, all kinds of stuff. So obviously we're going to want to have some restrictions, but we want to do that, based on our security rules and, keeping people accountable and things like that. What we don't want to do is we don't want to have restrictions because of technical issues. So what we're going to be looking at here today is how do we actually make it so that we can access resources from our Windows clients to our Linux clients and vice versa. So the purpose of this particular takeout is to demonstrate the installation. And actually, we're not going to actually do this. I should have cleaned this. We aren't going to be installing Red Hat Enterprise Linux manually. What we're going to be doing here is we're actually going to be running a Ansible Playbook. So we're going to be running this Ansible Playbook, and it is going to give us the ability to build these three RHEL boxes. They're actually running on an AWS platform, so everything that you see is running under AWS. We're going to go out and connect to it, and we are going to run this playbook. And for those of you that are doing labs, we're going to do that. We're actually going to start that process before I actually start my demo. And that actually reminds me of one quick thing. Hold on 1 second here. Just realized I want to get mine kicked off real quick. So, because I don't want you guys to have to wait forever for me to do this. So I'm going to get this kicked off while I'm talking, and I'll show you guys in just a second how this actually works. I'm sorry for one quick delay. All right, there we go. That's what I was looking for. I know you guys can't see this, and I will fix that in just a second. Okay, so I actually have an Ansible Playbook running. You guys should be able to see that right now, and I'm going to come back to it for just a second, or in just a second. But this is actually going out and it's actually building my 3 instances. So it's building my satellite server and it's doing some configuration on the satellite server. It's building the host that will be the IDM server. And it's actually not doing a whole lot of configuration there. We're actually gonna build the IDM server. We're gonna set up the bits in order for it to support what we call an Active Directory trust. We're going to establish that Active Directory trust. We're then going to set up the ability for our Red Hat systems to use Active Directory users. So we actually established some groups. So that is all going to be things that we do. But right now I've got this running to build out my systems, and I wanted to get that started so that we're not waiting a whole long time after I finish my discussion. For those of you that are actually going to be doing the labs hands-on, those first 25 that got here, you've been given a user account and a password, and you've also been given a PDF guide. What I need you to do is in that PDF guide, the very first exercise, just do steps 1 and 2. So open up an SSH session, a PuTTY session, MOBA Xterm, depending on if you're using a Red Hat or a Linux desktop or a Windows desktop. If you're using Linux, just open up a terminal session, do an SSH to the Bastion host, and run steps 1 and 2. If you're using Windows, obviously you're going to use PuTTY or MOBA Xterm. If you have not used MOBA Xterm, I like it a lot better than PuTTY. It's a lot more user-friendly, a lot more features and that kind of stuff. But go ahead and open up an SSH session and SSH into the Bastion host, and go ahead and do steps 1 and 2 so you guys can work on that. So what we're going to be doing, like I said, we've got the Ansible Playbook that is doing the installation of our Red Hat systems, just because we didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time. It's just installing an operating system, not really that technically exciting. We are then going to connect. We're actually going to go into our Red Hat satellite server, and we're going to set up several different things that are required in order to register our Red Hat client to the satellite server. Now, we're going to be doing some basic configuration with Red Hat Satellite just to establish a baseline so that other Red Hat servers can register as clients to the Red Hat Satellite server. Oh, I keep bumping my keyboard, sorry about that. So Red Hat Satellite is one of my specialties. I do Red Hat Satellite, I do Red Hat IDM, which is we're also going to be working with. I do Red Hat Single Sign-On, I do Red Hat OpenShift, so I do several different things. So I work with this stuff, in the real world, and I can tell you there's so much about satellite that we don't have time to cover. I could spend 3 days going through some of the different things that you can do with satellite. It's amazing as far as configuring your environment, patching your environment, managing your environment. It's a very, very powerful tool that we're just barely going to scratch the surface on, in this limited amount of time. So I'll give you guys a little bit of the breakdown of how you navigate through satellite. We're going to be working in the satellite web user interface, what we call the web UI. You just access that with a web browser. There is also a command line tool for satellite. It's actually a tool called Hammer that we don't really have time to get into the Hammer environment just because we're limited time here. Then we're going to be setting up satellite. We're going to establish our Red Hat 8 client as a client to satellite. We'll actually see that it has been registered. Then we're going to go in and we're going to be setting up the IDM server. I already kind of mentioned this, but we're going to set up the IDM server. We're going to apply the appropriate configuration so that it can integrate with an Active Directory environment. We'll then go in and we will actually establish some user groups that connect to a user group over on the Active Directory side. And then we will go ahead and we will connect our client. We'll actually enroll our client as an IDM client. At that point, the IDM client, when you go to do authentication on that IDM client, you can authenticate as a local user. If you have users that exist locally on the client itself, you can still continue to use those. But it will also, if you try to authenticate as a user name that doesn't exist on the local client, it's going to go out to the IDM server and say, hey, IDM server, I got this user trying to log in. Are they real? Do they exist? If there is a user in the IDM server that fits that username, has the right password and everything, you're going to get in. So basically, the IDM client host is going to be established as a client to the IDM server. It basically trusts the IDM server, so you can authenticate with IDM users. But taking that a step further, we went in and we established this trust relationship between the IDM server and the Active Directory server. So we'll actually be able to go into this IDM client host and actually log in as an Active Directory server. And that's one of the last things that we're going to actually do in the lab/demo. Yeah, Lemo. I think I just invented that term. So one of the other things we're going to do, obviously, we're going to set up the connection so we can actually access shared storage. So basically a Windows share from our RHEL 8 client, active or IDM client, whatever you want to call it. We start out, it's our RHEL 8 client, and it eventually becomes both a SAT server client and an IDM server client. So those are the things that we are going to be doing. So we're going to get into our demonstration. Now, hopefully my lab has gone. All right, so we have a little bit still going on here, so it's still working. All right, and that's fine. So we've got this because there are a couple things that I can do just because there's information that you guys are going to need. And let's see how. All right, so I'm actually I'm just doing a quick cut and paste just because I want to explain some things to you guys. And my system's being difficult. Hate that. I think my mouse is actually starting to go is the problem. All right, so hopefully this is not too difficult to see. I know the color could be a little bit better. And let's see if I can actually bump up the font size. Okay. Just because that might make it a little bit. Okay, so yep, that's still running in the background. All right, so here's what we've got. For those of you that are doing the labs, and for those of you who aren't, that are just going to be watching the demo, we're going to be kind of going back and forth. We're going to be doing some things through a SSH PuTTY MOBA Xterm session. So basically command line connection to our environment. And then we're going to also be using an RDP session, remote desktop protocol, just because we want to have a graphical connection in. So primarily we can open up a web browser and get into these hosts. Now, I mentioned the fact that all of our hosts are going to be running on Amazon Web Services, or AWS. The way that we have these configured are servers that are being built with this Ansible Playbook. They're accessible inside AWS. So we actually have to connect to this Bastion host, and then from there we can actually go in and connect from the Bastion host using a web browser into our internal servers. So these servers are not accessible directly from the internet. So that's why we've got to kind of go through this Bastion host. So we connect to that using RDP. We open up a web browser, and then we can access our satellite server web UI and also our IDM server web UI. So we're going to be working, we're going to see both of the web interfaces for those tools. So what I did, what you guys didn't really see all of the details on, is I went out and I ran this command. So I did a git clone of this particular Git repository. This has the information on how to build our 3 servers. This was actually developed by Mike M. That's going to be kind of our lab assistant. He and I are going to be helping with issues, any problems, questions that people have when they're actually doing the hands-on lab. He built all that. Phenomenal guy, very, very smart. And I need to actually change a couple things. This is what I was having trouble with, is I connected a couple lines. Actually, let's do this real quick. All right, so I want you guys to understand this. Now, there is a convention within Linux and Unix that this character right here, the / character, if it's the last character on the line, on a particular line, it actually tells the system to ignore the next character, which in this case would be the return character. So in the lab guide, you're going to see things that look like this, where you have your prompt, this user at whatever, blah, blah, blah. So this is where you're actually going to be typing. So this will be at the beginning of the line. You start typing after that. So I would have this prompt, and then I would just start typing cd rhinfrlab, blah, blah, blah. But in the book, you'll see a command that looks like this. What you need to do on the command line is actually put that in as just one line. So get rid of the / and just type it in as just one line. So whenever you see that, when you see a / at the very end of the line, when you're typing it in, when you're doing your labs hands-on, get rid of that /, do not put that in, and then just type them together. That's when you see a /. There is one particular command, and I'll get into it later on as we're going through the lab, where I actually have multiple lines together. And yeah, I'll get into it when we get there. It'll make more sense if I just explain it there. So anytime you see a / as the last character on a line, get rid of it and just tie in the next line with it as well. So what I did is I did this git clone command that you see up here at the top. Once I'd cloned that, I went ahead and ran this cd rhinfrlab and then the Ansible Playbook. For those of you that have your or you're part of the 25 that is going to be doing the labs hands-on, you should have been given the instructions. You should have been given the actual IP address and host name for the Bastion host. So if you're actually doing the labs hands-on, go ahead and open up that SSH session, PuTTY session, MOBA extern session, whatever it is, and run these 2 lines. Those are the first 2 steps in the lab guide, and let them run. Obviously, that will take a little while. So continuing on, when we're running, when the playbook ends, the very last task of the playbook is actually going to display a UUID. And we'll see that. I'll point this out in just a second when my playbook ends. But it's going to list a 4-character UUID. You're going to want to record that. I actually recommend that you open up a file using a text editor on your local workstation, laptop, whatever. And typically, if I'm doing a text editing locally, if I'm on a Linux box, I typically will use Atom. You can actually just go out and do a Google search for Atom. And I actually use that on both Linux and Windows. It works on both. That way it's just consistent. For a long time, I was actually on Windows platforms. I was using a product called Notepad++. So it's kind of like the old Notepad tool from Windows, but it has a lot of features and functions. It's a lot more user-friendly. So I would recommend downloading and installing either Atom or Notepad++. Go ahead and open up a text file with those. And one of the things you're going to want to put in there is the UUID number of the set of hosts that you have. There's a reason why you're going to want to know this UUID number. You're going to want to keep it handy because you're going to have to use it and put it into a bunch of different commands that we're going to be running. So it's that last step. It's going to tell you the UUID. It's also going to give you the name of a text file. And the text file is going to be in the lab01 directory. And it's going to start out with 4 characters, the actual name of the file. So in the 4 characters, I have them listed here with 4 question marks. Well, it's actually going to be that UUID number. So it's going to be your UUID number -lab-environment.txt or .txt. This file is going to have the host names and IP addresses and the information about your lab systems. Now, the reason that UUID is important is, first of all, it's going to tell you where that lab file is, and there's going to be a bunch of them. You're going to want to make sure that you're getting your lab file based on your UUID, because there's a bunch of us running the Ansible Playbook right now. I'm running it. The 25 of you that are doing the hands-on lab are running it, and Mike Chen is running it. He may actually have his done already. So there are a bunch of them, and so we're going to end up with a bunch of files, and they're going to be identified by UUID number. You're going to want to grab the correct one. You're not going to want to grab someone else's. If you do, you're going to end up with problems. So make sure you're using your UUID number. Make sure you know what that is. Then part of the reason this UUID number is important is because our host names actually include that UUID number. So I will have a set of hosts that are identified with my UUID number. You're going to have a set of hosts that are identified with your UUID number. So we're going to need to do that. Now, in the lab guide, you're going to see things like RHEL 8 client 0 dot question, 4 question marks dot demo1 dot pd dot stonedoor.io. So that's what you're going to see in the lab guide. When you have to type this in, you're going to want to replace those 4 question marks with the UUID number for your systems. So in the lab guide, it would be RHEL 8 client or RHEL 8 IDM server or RHEL 7 SAT6 server. So those are the 3 different things. But you're going to want to replace the question marks with your UUID number. So if, for instance, your UUID number were 2F0D, you would actually change it. When you're typing in on the command line, you're going to put in RHEL 8-client-0.2F0D.demo. So you're going to have your UUID replacing the question marks every time you type that in. Now, the other thing is, let me explain this. Up here at the top, looking at my prompt, I have this user hashtag or hash mark or pound sign or whatever you want to call this funny little character. It actually has a real name. It's actually called the Octothorpe, but that's totally irrelevant for our discussion here. You can Google it later if you want. It's Octothorpe. So whenever you see this, that actually would be your user account, whether you're user 01, user 02, user 03. So the way that you would type that in is, it would be like user 01 or user 02 or user 22 or whatever it may be. So get rid of the hash marks and replace this. So anytime you see that user hash hash, that is telling you use your user account, the user account that was assigned to you. So that's definitely a critical thing to understand. Now, when your Ansible Playbook ends, we're going to go look at this file, the lab1 your uuid-lab-environment.txt, and we're going to go ahead and look at that. And in that text file, you're going to arrange the information that you want a certain way. So in that text, local text file, and we're going to do this just so we can kind of copy and paste and make our life simple in a few cases throughout the labs. And the way we're going to see the contents of that is we're actually going to use a Linux command called cat. It's short for concatenate. So we're just going to cat our file, and we're going to see what we've got. So having discussed all that, I'm going to kind of reiterate this as we go through, because we have some work to do. All right, so everybody ready? All right, so here, my Ansible playbook has ended, and I mentioned the fact that the last task is going to tell us about our UUID. So my UUID is going to be this CD47. So CD47, that's my UUID number. It is not yours. Do not use this. You'll mess up both of us. And so I have this file under lab1 c47-lab-environment.txt. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cat that file, and I am an efficient typist. You spell efficient L-A-Z-Y. So I'm going to go ahead and cat that file. And you can see it tells me that my UUID is C47. It was deployed by test user 25 when it was completed. Then it tells me about my host. I have a RHEL 8 client host and my IP address. I have a RHEL Idm server and my IP address, and a SAT6 server with my IP address. Those of you who are doing labs, you're going to have a different set of IP addresses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this information, particularly my hosts, and I'm going to copy them into a text file. So give me 1 second to do that. Actually, I'll show you what I'm doing here real quick. Might as well let you guys see what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna, all I did was kind of copied out of that one file. I'm gonna get rid of the information I need. Now, some of you may notice, those of you that are familiar with Linux may recognize what I'm, or the format. This is very similar to what you would see in an Etsy hosts file. So, so I'm gonna do that, and I am going to go ahead and save it. So I have that information, so I know, so this is the name of my RHEL 8 client, and this is the IP address for that RHEL 8 client. Then I have the IP address and the host name for my IDM server, and I have the IP address and the host name for my Satellite 6 server. So I have those. I'm going to move them out of the way because I need them. You don't. You guys will have your own set. You guys will have your own UUID. So you guys need to record this and make sure that anytime you see, you know, like RHEL 8 client -0 dot question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, you put in your UUID. Anytime you see user pound pound or user hash hash, whatever you want to call it, you're putting in your user account number, or, you know, account name, like user 01, user 12, user 18, whatever it may be. So those are things that you're going to want to have on hand. Now, we are going to jump in and get to work. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my Bastion host. So our Bastion host is just a RHEL 8 system. So I'm going to go in, I've connected to my Bastion host. I'm going, and you guys are going to do this using some kind of an RDP session. Now, I'm using a tool called Remina, REMMINA. It's a tool that works on Linux. My workstation, as you might imagine, is a RHEL, in this case it's RHEL 7.8. So that's what I work on day to day. I don't use Windows very much. It's just, I used to, you know, I was actually an MCSE for years ago, but I tend to work more in Linux. So what we're going to do here is I'm in my RHEL 8 box. I'm going to click on Activities up here in the upper left-hand corner. It takes a few seconds, and it opens this little sidebar, and you see this Firefox icon. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Firefox, and it's going to launch a Firefox web browser. And I'm just going to go ahead, I'll kill that one, I don't need it. And I'm going to go in here, and I put in the IP address for my SAT7 server. Now it comes up, tells me a potential security risk. We're just using self-signed certificates. These are not signed by a well-known certificate authority, so you'll get this kind of security risk. Go ahead and click on Advanced, scroll down, and click on Accept the Risk and Continue. And that opens up our satellite login screen. I'm going to log in as admin, the password of Red Hat. And this was set up by that Ansible Playbook. The Ansible Playbook built my satellite server for me. We didn't want to take the time because that's going to take a while. I'm going to go ahead and save the login. Doesn't really matter. So here is the desktop, or the dashboard for Red Hat Satellite. Now with Satellite, we have several tabs, what we would call main tabs, along the left-hand side. So anytime in the lab guide where it says go to a main tab, it's talking about one of these. Now I'm going to start out, I'm going to jump into the content main tab and the subscriptions sub-tab. So what I'm doing is I'm actually going to be assigning certain Red Hat subscriptions. So I click on Manage Manifest, I click on Browse, and I just want to go to the home directory for this user. So I'm just going to click on up here at the top where it says test user 25. So I click on that, and I just want to load the manifest. So you can see there's actually a file here that says manifest_SDG Red Hat Infra Lab. Each one of you will have a manifest very similar to this. The last few digits, like mine is like T164101Z. You guys might have the same numbers, you might have different numbers, it doesn't really matter. So you're just going to double click on that, and that's going to start the import manifest process. So the manifest import doesn't take very long, so 2-3 minutes maybe. So it's going out and it's just assigning subscriptions to this satellite. So now the satellite can actually assign those subscriptions to any host that you register to the satellite. So anytime I register a host with a satellite, satellite's kind of the boss. And it's where that host is going to go to get patches and configuration information, all that kind of stuff. So it went ahead and ran And you can see I now actually have 5 entitlements. So I've got these, I don't actually want to change that. So I clicked in the wrong spot. So it doesn't really matter. What we're going to do next is, now that we have subscriptions, that's going to give us access to some Red Hat repositories. So I want to go ahead and add some repositories. So I'm going to search just because it makes it so much easier. So I'm searching for Red Hat Satellite Tools for RHEL 8. So I'm going to do a search, and it comes back with what I want. Now, I can click on the name, or I can actually click on this little greater than symbol over to the left. In the lab guide, I just told you to click on this little greater than symbol over to the left. So I click on that, and it opens up a section where I can go ahead and enable this repository. I'm just going to click on the little blue plus sign, and it now has let's see, so it now is enabled. I'm now going to go ahead and synchronize this repository to my satellite server, meaning I'm going to pull it down from Red Hat. So I'm going to go to Content, I'm going to go to Red Hat Repositories. Sorry, I'm going to go to Content and Sync Status. I can't think and talk at the same time. You guys can kind of figure that out. So I pull that down. I'm going to expand all so I can see everything I have. The only thing at this point, as far as repositories I have, is my satellite tools. I could click on it. So I can do that. I could also do the select all, and I'm going to click on synchronize now. Now this is very fast. There's not much here in the satellite tools. It's a relatively small repository. So you can see it's going out, kicking off. It's going out and finding out the information about the packages in the repository, and then it's downloading the repository itself. And you can see it's done. So it was pretty quick. Now we're going to go back to Content. We're going to go to Red Hat Repositories, and we are going to go ahead and search for the Red Hat repositories for RHEL 8. So this is just the base OS RPMs. We're going to need this later on when we are doing some configuration with our RHEL 8 client. So we're going to need that. So I'm going to click on this, or the little icon, and the only one you need to check is just the x86 underscore 64.8. So I'm going to click on that and enable it. So it is now enabled. I'm going to go back into my sync status. And I'm going to expand all. I'm going to select all. Now I don't really have to because I already synced my satellite tools, but I just click on it anyway. It's just faster that way. And I click on synchronize now. Now this is going to take a while. There is a lot more content in the base OS RPMs, so it's going to be running, but we don't have to sit there and watch it. If we did, it normally takes like 15, 20 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes 12. You know, I've seen different things, kind of depending on your network speed, but we don't really need to watch this. What we do need to do is we need to configure certain characteristics here in the satellite server so that we can register our RHEL 8 client to the satellite. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go out and we are going to create what's called an activation key. So I click on the Content main tab, I clicked on the Activation Key subtab, and this is what I get. Right now we don't have any activation keys, so we're going to go ahead and create one. So we're going to click on Create Activation Key. We are just going to go ahead and we're going to call this 55AK. Now, I picked 55 because it's May 5th. I did AK for activation key. I'm trying to keep this really simple. Now, for environment, I'm just going to click on Library. For content view, I'm going to do default organization view. If we had a lot more time, we could have gone in and we could have created what's called a lifecycle environment. We could have created a content view, and this is how we can get specific of how we want certain hosts that are registered to satellite to be built, how they're managed, when patches are given out, what patches are given out, what operating systems do they have. We can get really, really, really specific with how we manage all of our RHEL hosts in our entire environment using satellite. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do that today, so I'm just using the real generic stuff, which would be library and default organization view. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on Save, and that's going to create my activation key. But there is some more that we need to do. Now that it's created, we need to do some configuration for it. Now, when you're in a subtab like this, there's going to be some keyword tabs across the top. So we're in the detail, oops, hate that. We're in the details keyword subtab right now, but I want to go to subscriptions. So I click on that keyword tab. And I want to add some subscriptions. Now, we already added them to the satellite server, but now I want to add them to this activation key. So I'm going to click on Add right here. I'm going to click right down here near the bottom. I'm just actually going to click in the checkbox next to quantity. And I'm going to click the blue box that says Add Selected. So I've now added these subscriptions, so this lists, and this is also where I could remove them if I wanted to. I don't want to do that. So I now have these 5 subscriptions available. None of them have been used at this point. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into repository sets. And the reason I want to do this is because the satellite tools repository set is disabled by default. Well, we're going to want to use it. So I'm going to click on the checkbox next to this satellite tools, and I'm then going to go up to select action, and I'm going to override this to enabled. So now this activation key has the appropriate subscriptions and the appropriate repositories for what we need to do in the rest of the lab. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I want to create an operating system. So I'm going to go to the hosts main tab, and I'm going to go down to the operating system subtab. Now, we have an existing operating system for the RHEL satellite, or this exists because we're running on a Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.8 platform. That's what we installed the satellite on. So it exists by default because that's what the satellite's running on. But we want to create a different one because our Idm server and our client host we're going to be working with, they're both running RHEL 8. Now, we're not using RHEL 8 for satellite because we haven't gotten it completely ported over. So at this point in time, you cannot run satellite on a RHEL 8 box. You might do some cobbling together and try and get it work, but it's not supported. So at this point, we run satellite on RHEL 7.8. It won't be long, and we will have it running on RHEL 8, so don't worry about that. It's going to happen soon. But at this point, supported configuration, we run satellite on RHEL 7.8. So we now want to create a new operating system. So we're going to go in here, and we're going to call this RHEL 8.2. The major version is going to be RHEL 8. The minor version is going to be 2. Now the description, we want to call this Red Hat 8.2. And this is the actual name that shows up. You know, when we first clicked on operating systems, it said Red Hat 7.8. That actually came out of the description field. So we want to use that. For our family, we're actually going to use, surprise, surprise, Red Hat. Now for architecture, the only one we really are going to be working with here is the x86-64. So I clicked on that. It was in the architecture box over here, and it's now in the selected items box. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to go to the installation media, and I'm just going to click on Fedora Mirror, and that will put that over there. We also want to go to partition table, and for this, I'm just going to do the Kickstart default. So I'm going to find that in my list, and I'm just going to click on it, and that will move it over to selected items. So I've got my operating system set up the way I want. I've got my partition table, installation media. We're not doing anything with templates or parameters at this point. That's details we don't need to get into. We don't have time to get into right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on submit, and that's going to create my operating system. So now you can see we actually have Red Hat 7.8, which already existed. We now have Red Hat 8.2. Now, the next thing we're going to get into is one of the more confusing parts of Satellite, in my personal opinion. We're going to go in and we're going to configure, and so we go to the Configure main tab and we go to Host Groups. Now, in Satellite, we have our we have what's called a host group. We also have what's called a host collection. Host groups are primarily used for provisioning new RHEL hosts or new hosts. It could be RHEL, it could be, we can actually support other operating systems as well. So it's, when you want to build a totally new system, you can go in and do it through Satellite. Satellite will build a system for you. And your host group is going to define how you want that host built. So as part of the provisioning process, you're going to say, hey, build it using this host group, and it'll tell you what operating system, what packages, all kinds of stuff. You can get really fancy with your host groups. We're going to keep it really simple. So host groups are primarily used for provisioning. Once you have hosts provisioned or under management, whatever, after the provisioning is finished, most of your management is done based on host collections. So host collections are primarily used for management. That's generally, a general distinction you can normally think of as host groups are for provisioning, host collections are for post-provisioning management. But there's one other thing that host groups are used for, and that is for registering new hosts. So we have to create a host group because we have to use it when we're doing our provisioning. So I'm going to click on host group, or create host group, and I'm just going to call this 55HG. For my lifecycle environment, I'm just going to pick library. Content view is going to be default organization view. Content source is going to be my SAT server. Puppet environment is going to be production. I don't have to worry about the others. Deploy on, Puppet master, Puppet CI, I don't really care about. But now I'm going to go to my next keyword tab, which is operating system. For my architecture, I'm going to do x86-64. This opens up an option for my operating system is going to be 8.2. I'll open up my media option, which is Fedora Mirror, and my partition, which is going to be Kickstart default. I'm not going to worry about root password because we're actually not doing any provisioning. We're just registering. Now, other things, I want to make sure location is set where lab is selected. Organization, SGG is selected. The last thing I need to do is go into my activation key, and I click on the box, and it gives me a list of possible options here. The only activation key I have is 55, so I'm going to select that. And I'm going to go ahead and click Create. So now I have this this host group created. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to hosts, and I'm going to click on content hosts. Now, when I do this, it's actually going to show me three things. It actually really has just one SAT server, but it looks like it's two, and then we have a different host that was used for some things during the initial provisioning. None of these really matter that much. One thing that does tend to confuse people and worry people in real corporate environments is when you're looking at the Satellite server itself, under the subscription status column, you can see it's got this red X basically saying, hey, this isn't subscribed. Well, that's not a problem because the Satellite server itself, when you set up a Satellite server, it actually gets subscribed to the Red Hat customer portal directly. So the Satellite server actually subscribes through Red Hat itself. So what you're looking at here is it's saying, this particular page is saying, hey, this Satellite server, it's not subscribed to us. Well, us being the Satellite server itself. The Satellite server is not subscribed to itself. That's why you get this red X. And like I said, it's not an issue. That's just the way things work. Now, when we set up our RHEL 8 client and register it, it'll show up and it will show a green icon here, not a red one. And that's what we're going to do next. The next thing we're going to get into is we're going to go into our RHEL 8 client, and we are going to set it up as a SAT server. Now, in the lab guide, for those who are looking, the steps in the lab guide, it has user pound or user hash. You can see I'm actually logged in as test user 25, so that's what I see here. It also tells me what host I'm on. I'm currently on the Bastion host. It also tells me the name of the directory I'm in. I'm in the Red Hat InfraLab directory. So this is my prompt over here. Your prompt will look a little different. Your prompt will be user 01, user 12, user whatever, and then it's also going to change those. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to SSH into my RHEL 8 client. So nice thing is, you know, the command line with Red Hat does have some user-friendly features. So I just double-clicked on this, and you can see the IP address for my RHEL 8 client is highlighted. I'm now going to click my middle mouse button, and you can see it pasted. Now, in the lab, it actually tells you to actually use your user ID number. In my case, it would be test user 25 at. Well, if you're going to a different host and you want to stay the same user, you don't have to put in the user account at. I'm going to do that the first times just so you guys can see it, but later on I'm just going to use the IP address just because I'm an efficient typist. Now, one of the nice things is we have set up when you're going in as the same user from the Bastion host into the client or the IDM server or the satellite server, we've actually set up some SSH keys so you don't have to type in a password. There are other places you will have to use a password, but when you're going from one host to another, you don't. We just kind of made that simple. So I am now in my Red Hat Enterprise Linux client host, and I'm in my home directory. That little tilde character tells you you're in your home directory. So you can see my prompt changed. So I was in test user 12 in the Bastion host. I'm now in the client host. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to add my satellite server and my IDM server to the etc hosts file. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste. Once again, I'm trying to be an efficient typist here. Copied that out of my lab guide. Now, once again, I need to get rid of these 4 question marks. So I'm going to get rid of these 4 question marks, and I'm going to replace them with CD47. You're going to replace them with something else. Now, the first thing that I'm doing is I actually want to go in and notice I'm using my SAT6 server. So I need the IP address for my SAT6 server. So once again, I'm going to double click and then middle click. So now I've got my echo, I've got the correct IP address, I have the correct host name, and I'm going to run that. And that's going to display that name out to my screen, or the content to my screen, but it's also going to put it into my etc hosts file. Now the next thing that I want to do, and another nice thing with the Unix command or Linux command line, I can hit the up arrow and I can recall a command. Well, in this case, I actually want to add my IDM server, but remember the IDM server actually runs on RHEL 8. And once again, I need to put in the correct IP address. So I put that in. Now, the lab guide doesn't have you do this step, but I'm just going to do it real quick, where I'm actually going to go look at the content of my etc host file. And you can see that I just added, or you can see those 2 hosts are in Etsy hosts. That's what these last two commands I just ran, that's what they did. Then the next thing I need to do is I need to pull down a command, or it's actually a Python script from my SAT6 server. So I copy and paste out of my lab guide, but once again, I need to replace those question marks with CD47. That's my UUID. So I'm going to pull this file down, and you can see that works really fast. Then I want to change my permissions on that file. So I want to make it executable by everyone. So I'm going to change it and make it executable. And so now I've set this system up to register it with the client, or with the satellite server. And I'm going to go in here, and once again, I just copied and pasted directly out of, or, to some extent out. Once again, that backslash at the end of the line, you would want to get rid of that. So I go in, and my command is going to be sudo Etsy libexec platform python bootstrap.py-l admin-s, the name of my SAT server, including the correct UUID number. Make sure you have a space after the stone door IO. Do this just so you want stone door IO and then space -o SDG dash uppercase L lab dash G 55HJ and 55AK. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit enter and run this command. Now it's going to ask me for the admin password. We are talking to the SAT, when we're running this command, we're actually talking to the satellite server. So we need the satellite server's admin password. Later on, we're actually going to be using the admin account from the IDM server. That has a different password. So this has a password of Red Hat. So I run that, and it's going to run through several, it runs through a lot. This bootstrap.py script has been something that Red Hat has been working on for a long time. And it's designed to register your host to the client and make it relatively seamless, relatively simple. Now, when this is running, there's a certain point where it's actually going to pause. It's actually going to stop, and you're going to see a command where it basically says running. It'll have the date and time, and it basically is the command it's going to say, or the line you're going to be looking for, it's going to say /opt/puppetlab/puppet/bin/puppet space agent test no op. Tags, no such tag, -- wait for cert 10. So when you see this wait for cert 10, when this thing kind of stops and hits that wait for cert 10, this line right here, you can see that's the last line. I'm now going to go back into my web browser. So I go back in here, and I'm going to click on infrastructure and capsules. All right, there we go. And the mouse is really, okay, there we go. So we are now looking at capsules. And what this is doing is basically this RHEL 8 client basically submitted a request saying, hey, can you give me a certificate saying that I'm basically a client of yours? So I click into capsules, I go into the Puppet CA keyword tab. You can see this has information about certificates. The main thing I'm looking for is over here to the left, this little yellow triangle. There's the number 1 right beside it, and I'm going to double click on that 1. It might work if you single click. It will definitely work if you double click. And this tells me my pending certificate request. I'm just going to go over here to the far right where it says action sign, and I'm going to sign this request. the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into hosts and content hosts. It shows my client, and back here in the back, you can see that the Python script is going to do a few more things. So it's going to add some stuff. So basically, this was the line we were at when it waited. Once I signed that certificate, it will go ahead and do this. Now, if you wait long enough, it will auto-sign that certificate. So you don't have to go back in, but obviously you can, and it normally will be faster if you go in and sign the certificate. So my Bootstrap PY was complete. It was a success. I now have my client host, and you can see it has the green check mark. So this is now a client registered to the satellite server. Now, this is important because later on, we're actually going to need to pull down some packages to do some of the other things that we have coming up. So we are now going to go back to our command line, and we are going to exit. So right now, you can see I'm in the client RHEL 8 client. So my prompt tells me that. I'm going to exit out of that. And now I'm actually going to SSH into my Idm server. So I'm going to go to that text file I created earlier. I'm going to just copy the IP address for my Idm server or the host name, either one. And I'm just going to middle click. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. Oops. So it helps if I do that in the right place. So yeah, here, not in my text file. What's going on here? It should not be taking this long. So let's see if giving it my username speeds this up a little bit. Shouldn't normally take that long at all. That's concerning. Oh, that's really not good. Oh, that would be why. How did I get that wrong? All right, excuse me 1 second. Oh, come on. All right. So my bad, sorry, I was looking at the wrong file. And that host that I was just looking at does not actually exist. So let's try this again. All right, now. There we go, that's what I should have seen. So yeah, it always helps to try and SSH to a host that actually exists. So I apologize for that. I hate when that happens. All right. So too fast, too far. Okay, so now we are in the IDM host, and we are going to be installing our IDM server. So right now this is just a standard RHEL host, and we're going to install it. So went by pretty quick, but I just copied and pasted this directly out of the lab guide. That was fun to create. So we went in, ran this, and it comes back, and it's going to ask you several questions. So it's going to give you some information, you'll see some output, and then it may pause and ask you some questions. The first thing that it wants to know is, hey, what's the server host name? Well, we're running this on the server that we want to be our IDM server. So just make sure that the output that you get is rel8-idm-server-0.your-uuid number .demo1.pd.stonedoor.io. So make sure that you're actually running it on your right RHEL IDM server, that you're not running on the satellite, you're not running it on the client, you're running it on this. So then the defaults, whatever you see in these square brackets, anytime you get a question, whatever in the square brackets, that's going to be the default answer. All you got to do is hit enter, and that'll select the default. And then it's going to come back and confirm the domain name, which in my case will be the C47 demo 1. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to provide the RHEL name, which is really just your domain name in uppercase letters. It's used for a tool called Kerberos, which we don't have time to get into, but you want to make sure that it's basically the same thing as your domain name, but it is in uppercase letters. So once again, I'm just going to hit enter. For the directory manager, I'm just going to do dir mgr for directory manager, pw01, dir mgr pw01. Then for the IPA admin, this is basically our IDM administrator. I'm just going to do IPA admin pw01, IPA admin pw01. So it's going to run that. It's going to start asking me some information. Do I configure DNS forwards? This is going to allow me to communicate with the AD server or AD servers, so I'm just going to say yes. Do I want to configure those as my DNS forwarders? So those are my two AD servers. So once again, I'm going to say yes. Do I want to add any additional DNS forwarders? I don't have any, I don't want them, so I'm just going to hit enter. It's going to give me some messages about DNS security, or what we call DNSSEC. You can ignore all those. We don't care for the purposes of our lab. Obviously, in a corporate environment, DNS security is more important than we're concerned about here. Then it's going to ask, do you want to search for missing reverse zones? We don't have any reverse zones set up for this server, so I could say no, and it wouldn't find any. I can say yes, and it wouldn't find any. So I'm just going to hit enter. It comes back and gives me some information. And it tells me about the IPA master server. It tells me about the certificate authority. It tells me about bind DNS, which is related to DNS. And it comes back and it says, do I want to continue to configure these systems with these values? The default is no. That is wrong. We do want to configure the system with these values. So I'm going to type in YES and hit enter. And it's going to go ahead and it's going to run these commands. So it's going to install the system based on that information. And it does take a couple minutes. So it's going out and it's actually building this as an IDM server. So that's, and everything I'm doing here, you guys are going to be doing in the lab. So you guys are going to get to do this. Now, this is running basically till 4. It's supposed to be 3 hours. The lab, obviously, the demo takes a while, the lab takes a while. So, technically we've got 3 hours. At the end of the 3 hours, I'm planning on going out and taking my wife to a restaurant. We're probably going to go bowling and to a movie and shopping at the mall. And oh, wait, no, all those things are closed. No, I really don't have any other plans. So if you guys are working on the lab and it takes you a little longer than 3 hours, I can hang out. Like I said, got no real plans. I'm stuck at home, so I might as well help you guys. My wife would love for me to take her to dinner or movie or shopping or whatever, but obviously that's not happening right now. So we might as well hang out together and I can help you guys with labs if you have any questions, problems, or anything like that. Yeah, so I'll be here. So if we run a little bit long, if you guys need to take a little bit more time or whatever, I can hang out. So right now we're building a whole bunch of things. We're starting a Kerberos instance. We're doing certificate authority. So IDM actually will set up its own certificate authority. There's multiple ways to build IDM, and I'm just kind of talking while we're watching this work. If you're going to be installing IDM and configuring it, one of the critical components that you need to almost pretty much have to decide before you ever install it is, how do you want to handle being a certificate authority? What I did right here is I just allowed this IDM server to be its own certificate authority. So it's what we would call a self-signed certificate authority. It doesn't go out to VeriSign or GoDaddy or any of these other certificate authority companies to verify that, yes, this system really is who it says it is. So this is being set up with a self-signed certificate. You can also set it up as what we would call a subordinate CA, or a subordinate certificate authority, in which case it would go out and talk to VeriSign or some other certificate authority. A lot of times when we're setting up IDM, we actually set it up to be a subordinate CA to your AD servers. So in that case, we'd actually, there's additional steps to doing the setup, but we basically go out and we send a certificate signing request to the AD. An AD administrator signs that and sends it back to you. We install it as a subordinate CA. The third option that I never do, you could do it in the lab. I don't know why you would, just because it's so simple to not do it at all. And that third option is to set it up where it's not a certificate authority at all. So when things become a client, when you register or you enroll a host as a client, it doesn't get any certificate information from the IDM server at all. But it's so easy to just set it up as a self-signed certificate authority that I never do it as not a certificate authority. But as I said, if you're going to be installing an IDM environment in, or an IDM server in your corporate environment, you want to define that ahead of time. There's actually with satellite and IDM and the majority of the Red Hat products, you need to do some significant planning ahead of time before you actually get to the install. Andrea mentioned some of the services we offer from Red Hat and from Stone Door Group. And one of the things that, like the satellite engagement or an IDM engagement, they normally take 2 or 3 weeks. If you're going to be doing a satellite engagement or an IDM engagement, understand that the first day to could be the first week is actually going to be dedicated to the consultant, myself or Mike or any of the Stone Door consultants. When we come out, we want to figure out what do you have going on in your environment. What kind of hosts have you got? How many have you got? Where are they set up? What kind of DMZs? You know, all kinds of different things, so that we can actually plan and architect a proper solution that's going to give you the best possible result. So part of that 2 to 3 weeks is actually going to be discovery and architecting and then deployment. All right, so we're to the point where our configuration is complete. The IPA client install command was successful. It will tell you that you need certain network ports to be open. We have them already open. And it will tell you to back up your CA certificate stored in root CA cert P12. These are required to create replicas. You can set up a multi-master replica environment where you've got multiple IDM servers. In case one goes down, you know, you have one that's still running, or for performance issues, there's a bunch of reasons why you might have multiple IDM servers. We only have one. It's not going to be around that long. It's not, you know, mission critical for some big corporate environment. It's here for the labs. So that's set up. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, I clicked on the wrong thing, sorry. I copied one thing, but then I went ahead and I highlighted that up there. So sorry, that was my bad. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to add the components that allow for connecting to an Active Directory trust. So we're going to go ahead and install that. Now at this point, we are talking to the IDM server, or in this case, they mention an IPA server. IPA is the open source upstream project that Red Hat used to create IDM. So anytime you see IPA, we're not talking about beer. It'd be nice if we were, but we're not talking about beer. We're talking about a upstream open source project that we use to create IDM. So IPA and IDM, you know, kind of mean the same thing. So in this case, we're looking at the admin password for the IDM server. So we set this up. I actually defined the password for the admin server for IDM. That is that IPA admin PW01 password we configured earlier. Now it says the SMB server message block configuration already exists. If we run this, it's going to break that existing Samba configuration. So this is part of connecting to a shared Windows resource. SMB.conf exists, but it's bone generic. We just created it. I mean, it's fresh off the installation. So it doesn't matter if I blow it away, you know, it doesn't matter. So do I wish to continue? I'm going to say yes. So when it warns me that smb.conf already exists, do I want to continue? I'm going to say yes. Then it's going to ask about enabling trusted domain support for /i-nis. We don't have any older clients in this lab environment, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter and go with the default selection of no. So we're not going to do trusted domain support. And like I said, that's for older and non-Linux clients. Then for NetBIOS name, this is actually my UUID in uppercase. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter for that. Then it asks, do I want to run the IPA-sysid gen task? For this, I'm actually going to say yes. Now, if I had thousands and thousands of users, I probably would not do this. It's basically just putting in a particular type of identifier that isn't always required for your user IDs, but in this case, we're just going to go ahead and say yes because we don't have many. So this is now going to go ahead and enable the AD trust components for my IDM server. So you can see that didn't take long at all. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually set up an AD trust. Now to do that, I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to get a, what's called a Kerberos ticket for the admin user. So just do a KNet admin. Once again, IPA admin PW01. So I've got that. Now this isn't in the lab guide, but I can actually go in and I can see what Kerberos tickets I have by using a command called klist. Once again, not in the lab guide, but here you can see I have this Kerberos ticket. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to establish my trust with the Active Directory server. Now, one thing that I'm going to do before we get there, this is my AD server. So I have a connection to this. You guys don't. You guys won't be able to see this the way that I do, but I kind of needed to do it just because. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to click up. I'm going to open up my Active Directory domains and trusts. One other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to look at my administrative center. First of all, I'll show you the users I've got. I have this group, which is RHEL users. I went in and created this, and this is a critical thing that you have to do. If you want to use an Active Directory group with IDM, so here I'm looking at this RHEL users, I scroll all the way down to the bottom and I go to the attribute editor, and you have to assign it this group, you have to assign it a group ID number. Obviously, each one should be unique. This is not set by default, so I actually had to go in here and I actually had to go in and edit, and I had put this in, and I just did 5520, 5520. Doesn't matter a whole lot what number I use, but you have to set that up, or setting up your group configuration to allow for AD users will fail. So that is critical. So just one quick thing I want to cover. Now we're going to be using this user right here, this ADWS. So it's an Active Directory Workshop User 01. That's how I kind of came up with the name. So Active Directory Workstation User 01. It's part of the Demo 1 domain. So this is the user we're going to use later on. It's actually going to be one of the last things we do is actually logging in as this user. So there's the user we're going to use. I already showed you the group that we're going to be connecting to, and we're going to do that here in just a few minutes. So that's one of the things that I did to set up this whole lab environment. Now the next thing, looking at my Active Directory domains and trusts, I have this demo1.pd.stonedoor.io. This is the Active Directory domain that we want to be working in. So I'm going to right click on this and go down to Properties, and I'm going to go to Trusts. Now I have a couple trusts that are just hanging out from people playing around with this previously, but right now this shows the trusts, and these were actually set up between different IDM servers. So I'm now going to go back to my command line, and I have this IPA trust add type AD demo1.pd.stonedoor.io, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. Now it wants my Active Directory domain administrator. This is someone that actually exists over here. This is probably something else I could have shown you. I actually created this guy earlier. I created this IBM trust user. And actually, let me open him up a little bit. And I actually made him a domain administrator within this Active Directory domain. So I created this IBM trust user. So that's what they want, is they want to know the name of an Active Directory domain administrator. So we have IBM trust user, the Active Directory domain administrator's password. So I'm once again going to copy, in this case, middle click. And that domain administrator's password is actually uppercase I, DM, so uppercase I, lowercase DM, trust user PW01, but the S is actually a $. And that is listed in your lab guide, so you want to make sure that you get that exactly correct. And it is, like I said, an uppercase I. So I had to make it, there are certain levels of complexity that AD requires, so that's why that is. I would have tried to make it a little simpler, but for AD rules, it had to be sufficiently complex. So I ran that, I put in the domain administrator's password, and it comes in and it tells me the Active Directory trust for Realm Demo 1 Snowdoor.io was created. So it was there, it was set up. So we'll go back into my Active Directory server, move that out of the way. Click OK, we're going to go back in. We actually have to look at it. It actually gets kind of updated and refreshed. And there you can see I have a incoming, or a domain that trusts this domain, which is cd47.demo1.pd.stonedoor.io. So I am now set up as a domain that trusts this AD domain. So we don't really need to look too much at that anymore. So I just set up this I set up this Idm server. I established the components so it can make a trust relationship with an AD server, and I just established that trust relationship. Now, the next thing that I want to do, just to be on the safe side, is I'm going to restart my Kerberos key distribution center, just so it now recognizes this new trust. If you didn't do this, you'll get an error message, and I'll actually show you where that is here in just a couple minutes. So we now have the IDM server set up. It's set up with the trust. So now we need to set up some groups so that we can actually use some AD user accounts. This is going to establish some external groups, internal groups, and basically bring in that Active Directory group into my external group. So the first thing I'm going to do is create what we call an external group, and I'm going to call it AD Linux Users External. Pretty simple. The next thing that I'm going to do after that is I'm actually going to create an internal group, and we actually refer to these as a POSIX group. Now, if I don't use this -- external, so this -- external tells IDM, oh, make this an external group. Notice I don't have it on this particular command, so it automatically makes it an internal group by default. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add that external group to my internal group. So the external group is going to be a member of my internal group. So when it comes back and it tells you the number of members added. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my AD group to my external group. Now, when I run this command, so I'm going to add group members, I'm adding it to the external user group, and I'm adding an external. Now, I identify this as the Active Directory domain, which is demo1.pd.stonedoor.io/uppercase AD RHEL users. Notice it has these single quote characters around this designation. This is critical. You have to have those single quotes or this will fail. Now it's going to ask me 4 questions. I'm just going to leave them the defaults. So I just hit enter 4 times. And it goes ahead and adds this. Now, let's see. Do you guys remember up here, I restarted the Kerberos and the SSD. And I also mentioned that attribute in Active Directory. So there was that attribute that I set for the AD/RHEL users. It was basically that group ID number. If I hadn't done all of those, I would have gotten an error message when I tried to add this group. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can have the actual error message listed somewhere. Yeah, I do, but give me 1 second because I want you guys to actually see this error message so you'll know what to look for. I should have kept this file handy, but luckily I know where it is. Okay, you'll get this error message right here. Now, I'm going to put it on my command line, but I'm going to start with a # so the system will ignore it. So it doesn't actually try to run it as a command. So if you are trying to add group member external and you're putting in this Active Directory, an Active Directory group name, and you get this error message, this no trusted domain match the specified flat name, if you get that error message, 99% of the time it's because you don't have that GID number attribute set on the group. Took me a while to figure that one out. I'm trying to, first time I ever was trying to connect Active Directory and IDM, and I kept getting that, and finally did a lot of digging and figured out, yeah, that GID number attribute is critical. All right, so back to where we were. So now we've set it up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an IBM user. So I'm going to go in here, and I actually need my IDM user account, or sorry, my IDM IP address. So I'm going to go in here. And once again, it's using a self-signed certificate, so I'm going to get this potential security risk warning. I'm going to click on Advanced. And scroll down. And I'm going to accept the risk and continue. Let's go back up. So here, this opened up the web UI login page for my IDM server. So once again, I'm going to go in as admin. And once again, we're doing the IDM server, not the satellite server. So remember, satellite server admin account password is Red Hat. IDM server admin account password is IPA admin PW01. And there we go. So we have this first view of our IDM server. Now with IDM, we actually have our main tabs across the top. So right now I'm in the identity main tab. There's the policy main tab, the authentication, network services, and IPA server. I'm going to go back into identity. Default view is hosts, or I'm sorry, users. You can also look at hosts. Right now it shows my IDM server. We'll go back into users, and I'm going to add a user. So we're just going to call this IDM user 01. First name of John. Last name of Doe. New password is going to be, so our password here is just going to be IDM U01 PW01. So IDM U01 PW01. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And so now you can see there's this user. So IBM User 01 is a user that actually exists on the IBM server itself. So that's where I created this. So we have this user. I'm going to go back into my command line, and right now I'm in the IBM server. And I know I'm in the IBM server because my prompt tells me I'm in the IBM server. So I'm going to exit out of that. Now I'm just going to go up. Now, I was in my IBM client before I was in my IBM server. So I use my up arrow keys to pull back my, oh, sorry, that wasn't, actually it helps. Oh, yeah, never mind. All right, scratch that. Once again, you guys remember what I said about thinking and talking at the same time? All right, so there is my IBM client. So when you do an SSH, a lot of times you're going to get an error message saying the system's not registered to Red Hat Insights. That's something we would do either directly through Red Hat, or because this is a satellite client, we do it through satellite. Once again, we don't have time to get into that. So I'm in my IBM client. And in this case, I want to set up my IBM client, or I'm sorry, I want to set up my RHEL 8 client as an IBM client. In order to do that, it's got to be able to talk to the IBM server, and it has to actually be the first DNS server that this client looks for. So I've got to go in and I've actually got to change a file called etcresolve.conf. Now, I mentioned earlier that when you're looking at the lab guide, and if you see a line that ends with a backslash, ignore that backslash and then just add the next line in as just one line. We're not going to be doing this here. With this, what we're doing right here is we're going to have multiple lines that I need to put into my resolve.conf. So what you see in the lab guide is exactly what you want this to look like. Really? All right. That should have pasted differently. Why is that not? The double or the single quote should be acting. I have never seen Unix or Linux ever do this. It's ignoring my double quotes. I have never in my life seen this before, so let's try typing it out directly. So maybe a cut and paste issue that's suddenly shown up, even though it hasn't done this. And I've run through this lab like 90 times. That's what it should be doing. That's what it should be doing right there. So, what happened, the way that Linux is supposed to work is anytime you have an unclosed quote pair, it should change you from your primary prompt, which is what we've got right here. So that test user 25 at RHEL 8 client, that's my primary prompt. Anytime you see a prompt like this on the command line and it lets you type, that would be what's called your secondary prompt. And what it's really telling you is, hey, you have an unclosed quote pair. And that actually is what, CD 47. So that's what it's really telling you. You know, not in so many words, but that's basically what it means. Anytime you have that greater than symbol as your prompt, it means, hey, you've got an unclosed quote pair. So go back out here. Now it's still unclosed, which is fine because I don't want it to be closed. So I want to put in the IP address for my IDM server. That's the main, or that's actually the most critical part. That's why we're actually doing this. And then we still want to have our AD name servers. And now the next thing that I'm going to do, this next line, is going to actually be closing off my quote pair. So you can see right here, after name server 10.32.10, that closes my quote pair. And that's all going to end up, oh. Really? All right. I have never had a system, never had a system do this to me. All right, so I'm going to cheat just to speed things up. If you guys know how to use VI, this might be an easier thing to do. So yeah, so if you know how to use VI, 10.0.6.57. Yeah, the reason that I did that whole thing, the long echo command in the lab guide, is because I didn't want to have to teach you guys VI. So in the lab, if you guys have problems with this, I'll walk you through it. There, that's what I want my etcresolve.conf to look like. I want it to say generated by network manager, search demo 1 PD stone door CD47, or in your case, use the correct UUID name server for my IDM server first, then my 2 AD servers. So that's what I was trying to do. That was a serious pain. Like I said, I've actually never in my life seen a Unix or Linux box act that way, and realize I actually started working with Unix and Linux back in 1994. I taught my first Sun Microsystems, my first Sun Microsystems Unix training class in '98. So it's not like I'm new at this. And I've never, ever in my life seen that happen before. So, all right. So moving on, we are now doing our IPA client install. We're telling it what domain we want to go to, and we're enabling DNS updates. So it tells us it's going to set up the IPA client. Do we want to configure with NTP or pool address? We are going to go ahead and say no for that. Then it's going to say, it gives me some information about the host name, the realm, the DNS domain, IPA server, base DN. It says, do I want to configure the system with these values? The answer to that is yes. All too often, people just go ahead and hit enter, and then they figure out, oh, I messed that up. So the answer to that is yes, I do want to do that. And we'll wait for it to finish. Now, it's going to ask for the user authorized to enroll computers. Once again, we're talking to the IDM server. So that would be admin. And the password would be the IPA admin PW01. And it's going out. And what I'm looking for is this client configuration complete. IPA client install was successful. So I now have this set up as an IDM client. Well, how do I know that? Well, I'm going to go back into my web UI for IDM. And under, once again, the identity main tab, I'm going to go to the hosts subtab. You can see there is my client. So this is now set up as an IDM client. Now here on the client, now I want to set it up so that I can access a shared Windows resource. So first thing I want to do is I want to update the information about what repositories are enabled for this host. And it got that information from the satellite server. So it went out and it talked to the satellite server and found out, based on that activation key we gave it earlier, it has the satellite tools repository and the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 base OS repositories. So it has those, it knows what they are. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install some tools that will allow me to talk to a Windows shared resource. Now, every once in a while, I'll get this. If this happens, if you get this failed error, no more mirrors to try, cannot download packages, go ahead and just run the command a second time. So do your run sudo yum install sysutils. Go ahead and run it a second time. And it never fails the second time. So sometimes fails the first time. If it does fail, go ahead and run it again. All right, so now we're going to make a directory that we have at, it's going to be a mount point for our shared Windows resource. Now, one of the things I didn't show you when I was looking at the Active Directory server that I could have is the fact that I have a shared directory out on my AD server. So here we're actually just going to be mounting that directory on the Windows server to that AD data directory we just created. Now the password for this user is uppercase A, D, W, $, user PW01. Now, it doesn't look like it did anything, but if I type in this command, which is in the lab guide, you can actually see this very last line. So I have a directory called AD-data, and it's actually mounted or connected to this IDM home directory on a server called DC1, which is actually my Active Directory server. So now I'm going to do a sudo ls-l of my AD data directory. And you can see there's actually a file that I created yesterday, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run a command. I'm going to create a new file in there. In this case, I'm actually going to call it test user 25. Now, if I do my ls-l of AD data, you can see there's my file. Now I'm going to do sudo cat of that file. Now the sudo cat isn't actually in the lab guide, but that file actually has the name of my host. So this file, this test user 25-testfile.txt, that actually exists on my Windows file system. I can see it and I can work with it here on my Linux box, but it actually physically resides on my Windows box. So the next thing we're going to do, so here, we talked about this earlier, that one of the things we're going to do today is be able to connect files and directories from Windows to Linux. I can copy anything I want from my Linux box over to my Windows box. I can work with Windows files over on the Windows side, as long as it's in that particular AD directory or Windows directory. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, right now we are in the RHEL 8 client as test user 25. That's who I've been working with. That's who I've been working as all day long. So I'm going to exit out of there. And now I am going to go back into my IDM client, which is what the 10.0.12.136 is, but I'm going to go in as that Idm User 01 that we previously created. So I'm going to go into my IDM client as Idm User 01. So I put in the name, and the IP address. It wants the password. And if you remember, the password that I set was IDMU01PW01. Now, this is the first time we've ever used this user. So I created the user previously. You guys saw me do that. But this is the first time I'm trying to use that user. So I put in the password, I hit enter. And it comes back and tells me the password expired. Basically, the first time you use the user, IDM, which is now part of IBM, totally different story, is going to require you to change your password. So once again, I put in IDMU01, PW01, and hit enter. I'm going to put in a new password, and I'm just going to change one character. I'm actually going to call it IDMU01NPW01. So once again, IDMU01, N for new password, PW01, and so I put it in. Now, when I do this, once again, I get this same error message. This is not registered to Red Hat Insights. No big deal. We don't have time to go through that. It also tells us that it does not have a home directory. There is some additional steps we could take to set up automatic creation of home directories. We don't have time to get into this. This is obviously taken a longer time to do the demo. So not going to worry about it. But notice it does tell me that I am in the RHEL 8 client as this user called Idm User. This same user that we created back here. So cool. So I just logged into this RHEL 8 client as a user that doesn't really exist on the client. It exists in the Idm server. But we're going to have even more fun, because now we're going to do the same thing, or the same type of thing, but we're going to use an AD user. That one I listed earlier. So the AD workstation, or sorry, AD workshop, user 01. So that is the AD user that we talked about, but I've got to add some additional information. I have to tell the system that it is coming from that AD domain. So the username is ADWSuser01, and it's coming from the AD domain. And I go ahead and hit enter, and it wants that password, which is ADW $, user PW01. Oh, come on, did I take that in? All right, so helps if you type the password correctly. So once again, gives us the same message because we're doing an SSH saying, hey, it's not registered to Red Hat Insights. Last failed login. So it tells me that I tried to log in and failed because I put in the wrong password. Yeah, I kind of noticed that since I did it. Once again, gives me the same error message about home directories, no big deal. But now if I type in this command ID, it tells me about this user. Let's do this. Just makes it a little cleaner. So I do ID. So it gives me the user ID number. It gives me the username, gives me the primary group name and number. It gives me all the different group name and number and all that kind of stuff, and then a whole bunch of information about this user. So I am now logged into this user, or logged in as this user on, so it's an Active Directory user on my IDM client. Now, one thing, I'm logged in as this user. We can see that. It's all listed right here. It tells me who I'm logged in as. Once again, if I actually look at my prompt, it tells me the user that I'm logged in as, and it tells me I'm on RHEL Client 8. So I'm logged into this RHEL workstation as a Windows Active Directory user. The system tells me that directly. Now to do that, I had to go through the IDM server. So the client talks to the IDM server talks to the Windows Active Directory server, and there's this whole, authentication chain going through these different servers. So I went through the IDM server to get this AD server because the IDM server has the trust established. But if I go into my IDM server and I go to users, it always tells you that the first time. If I look in active users, notice it's not there. When I go out and I do IDM engagements where I'm connecting to an Active Directory server, this is the thing that tends to confuse people the most. When you're looking at your IDM server, you're never going to see your Active Directory users listed here. When you set up an Active Directory trust and you authenticate as an Active Directory user, the IDM server is just acting as a pass-through conduit. So the client says, hey, do you know about this Active Directory user? The IDM server says, hey, hold on a second, let me ask the AD server. It goes over to the AD server and says, hey, is this user valid? In this case, the AD server said, yeah, it's valid as long as you put in the right password. And that information is passed back to the AD client, or excuse me, the IDM client, and the user gets to log in. So the IDM server doesn't actually keep a record of your AD users, so you're never going to see them in this list. I bring that up because, like I said, every time I do an IDM engagement that interacts with AD, people are always like, where's my AD server or my AD users? Well, you're never going to see them. Now, you will see your AD trusts if you go to the IPA server main tab and the trusts subtab. You can see right here, we trust demo1.pd.stonedoor.io. So that is my demo. So we set up Active Directory trusts. We set up actually, let's go through this in order. We set up a satellite client, set up all the configuration to register a satellite client. We registered that client. We configured the IDM server. We set it up to support Active Directory Trust. We established an Active Directory Trust. We set up the groups. Oh, that's one other thing I'll show you real quick. So we go into groups. And you can see we have our AD Linux users POSIX. So we also have a member. So the member of the POSIX group is this AD users external group. If we click on that, we can go see what external groups are attached to that. And it's the AD RHEL users at demo1pd.stonedoor.io. So here we're looking at our groups in Active Directory, or excuse me, in IDM. We can also look at our users. We can also look at our hosts. So we have done quite a bit, and it's taken a bit of time. So with that, we are going to break off. Those of you that are in the 25 users that are doing your own hands-on lab, we're going to go to a different connection. And I'm actually going to post this. You guys should have it. Renee should have given this to you. So you guys should have this if you're going to the external, or actually, never mind. Renee already gave that to you, but I'm going to go. So anyone who's not part of the 25, you guys are going to stay here. And Michael is going to take over. So I'm actually going to stop sharing. I'm now going to turn this over to Michael Chen. He's going to take over. He's going to run through these labs again. For the rest of you, the hands-on lab people, we're going to go ahead and jump over. Now, one thing for everyone to understand, at the end, there is going to be a poll. So we want to get your feedback on what you guys thought of this. There's also the information about doing this as a 5-day lab, or 5-day use of the lab. And Andrea will have a little bit more to share at the end, information about swag and that kind of stuff, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Michael. For those of you that are in the overflow that are watching Michael, I'm going to be leaving this particular session. So I appreciate you guys being here. I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope you guys found this interesting and useful. And hopefully I will see you guys on a Stone Door group engagement. So thank you guys very much. Everybody have a great day. Michael, are you there? I see you're sharing.
I'm here.
And I'm going to turn this over to you. So thank you guys, everybody. And we will talk to you later. Everybody that's doing the hands-on lab can go ahead and leave this session and join me over in the other Zoom meeting.
Okay, you guys, real quick, before we do want to take a quick break for everybody. So before we do that and move into the labs, I just want to remind participants that we'll be hosting additional events in the coming months. June 9th, we've got open shifts on IBM. July 11th, Red Hat for Windows. And August 5th, we have migraine legacy applications. Just a quick reminder of a couple service offerings that we shared earlier. We have our Satellite 6 Accelerator engagement, and we also have our complimentary 5-day access to today's lab environment. If you do participate in today's full event plus our lab environment, feel free to reach out to us to schedule initial consultation, and then we'll provide a complimentary 5-day access. What we want to do now, you guys, let's transition over to lab environment. But as mentioned, just to reiterate what Eric had said, we'll break out into a couple different groups. So if you all could check your chat session to confirm participation, your instructions would have been emailed or can be emailed to you to join the lab environment that Eric will be working. And then the rest of you can stay on this particular bridge for Michael's demonstration. But why don't we do this real quick? Let's take a 15-minute break overall, and it's now 3:14. So let's just come back at 3:30 Eastern time. So that's Eastern time, making sure we've got that right. So quick 15-minute break we'll give everybody, and then folks that had the were selected for the hands-on lab, follow those instructions to work with Eric on that, and everybody else can join back on the same bridge. Thanks again, you guys.